Science Institute, and the broadcast video is now live. Welcome to our Hubble Hangout today. Many of you expected to see Tony Darnell here. Unfortunately, Tony had to leave on a family business and is unable to join us today. So what was going to be a conversation between Tony Darnell and myself, well, it's going to be a conversation between me and myself. So I guess I'm going to have multiple personalities today. Our topic today is the Ring Nebula. And we had a beautiful press release just last week about the three-dimensional structure of the Ring Nebula. And normally Tony and I would banter here all about the Ring Nebula, but I'm going to go directly to my screen sharing and pull up my PowerPoint, starting my screen share, and let's see, what do I have to hit? There we go. Okay, so our topic today is the Ring Nebula, and this image here is the Ring Nebula image that we released in 1999. This is the Hubble's image of the Ring Nebula. Now, what is the Ring Nebula? Besides it's just this gorgeous ring, it's in the constellation of Lyra, and its category of a nebula is as a planetary nebula. Now, it has nothing to do with planets. Planetary nebula is a misnomer that when people first saw a nebula like this, they thought they might have something to do with planets because, if you see these fuzzy objects, they look sort of planetary-like, but this has nothing to do with planets. Matter of fact, what it is the death of a star. The death of a middle-aged star, I'm sorry, not middle-aged star. The death of a medium-sized star, a middle-sized star. Very, very big stars, they can they die by going bang. They do supernova explosions. The less massive stars like the sun or a few times larger than the sun, die by blowing off their outer layers. During their main sequence phase, most of their lifetime, they are fusing hydrogen into helium in their cores. And after they run out of hydrogen in their cores, they start trying to fuse helium into carbon through the triple alpha process. That takes 3 helium nuclei, which are called alpha particles, pull them together to form carbon. And if you that happens for about 10% of the lifetime. Uh-oh. You're seeing just the admin of the PowerPoint. I'm getting a message. Is that better, Jonathan? It's like Jonathan Eisenhammer is in the background telling me things that are going wrong here. Can you? It's showing the wrong part of the PowerPoint. How about this, Jonathan? Now that if I just do screen share like this, will this work better? Let me get back to the Google Hangout and see what I'm sharing. All right, well, that looks like what I'm sharing is working. I guess if I go full screen, things go a little bit crazy. All right, so I won't go full screen. All right. So what was I saying about the Ring Nebula? Ring Nebula, I guess if you haven't been seeing it, Jonathen's telling me what?
We're saying that. We're not seeing the PowerPoint itself.
You're not seeing the PowerPoint screen. When I go full screen, it's it's not showing you full screen. It's only showing you this. Yeah. All right. Well, then I guess that's.
I think
going full screen doesn't work.
Share the whole desktop.
I did. Oh, if I share the whole desktop, then it'll do that. Yeah. All right. There we go. I'm out of my screen share, and I'm going to go back into my screen share where it says share the whole full screen. There we go. And then if I start screen share, we do this, I select that, and I go full screen. There we go. That should be what you're seeing now. So now that you've got the full screen there, instead of choosing the individual window. All right, so you were able to see the Ring Nebula when I was talking about it, but it was small, it wasn't full screen. Okay, so where was I? Ring Nebula, planetary nebula, medium-sized star, dies, goes through hydrogen fusion in its core during its main sequence, goes through helium fusion during its red giant stage. Okay, and then after it finishes helium fusion, it tries to go beyond that. And if it doesn't have enough mass, the gravity to compress the core of the star to heat it up to be able to go beyond that, It is unable to go beyond. It heats up but can't go further and actually ends up blowing off its outer layers. So what you're seeing with the Ring Nebula is actually the outer layers of the star being blown off like a smoke bubble into space. Let's see what Jonathan has to say here. All right, Jonathan says it's perfect now. I hope the rest of you think it's perfect too. Okay, so sorry, Tony's not here to run the Hangout, so this is only the second one I've run. All right, so what you're seeing is the outer layers of the star being blown off into space. And then at the very center, you see that white dot at the center? That is what will become a white dwarf. That's the core of the star. All right, so the planetary nebula is between the red giant phase where it blows off its outer layers, and the white dwarf phase, which is where the core, which is basically a mass of carbon at 100,000 degrees, that's going to cool for trillions of years. Now, the Ring Nebula is one of the prototypical planetary nebulae. It's one of the most famous planetary nebulae. But there are so many of them, and in fact, they're incredibly gorgeous. So, here is another iconic planetary nebula called the Helix Nebula, and you'll see it has structure pretty much like the Ring Nebula, a nice ring all around a central white dwarf star, what will become a white dwarf star. But planetary nebula often have very complex structures. They don't blow off in these beautiful little spherical smoke bubbles in space. They're actually generally bipolar. All right, and so here you can see the spirograph nebula, as it's called. You might be able to get that because of the weird patterns of lines on there. It looks a little bit like a spirograph pattern. But you can see the central star in the center, but you can see there's a bubble around it. And if you look over on the edges on one side and on the other side, you can see there are actually holes in that bubble, indicating that there's a wind blowing left and right, evacuating the interior of that bubble. You can see that even more, that bipolar phenomena in this planetary nebula, where this one looks very much like, I don't know, a tin can that you've chopped off the edges. It's just a cylinder. All right? And so you've got a cylinder of material, and the material's flowing out both left and right. Now, it doesn't have to be this nice, beautiful cylinder. All right? It can actually have very strange patterns. Again, as you can see, this is a complex planetary nebula. We got sort of a bubble on the right and a bubble on the left, and they've got really, really complex structures there. Here's another one that looks like that tin can, that cylinder, but it's pinched in at the center. That generally we think that there is a material stopping the outflow in the radial direction, but in the direction perpendicular to the main flow. The main flow is going out this direction, but there's material slowing down the flow in that direction, so it flows off. And here is the famous so-called butterfly nebula, where we believe there is a disk of gas material that's sort of restricting the waistline of this, and the two butterfly wings are the flows out in either direction. So you've got these two major types that people love to talk about, a ring type, and then you've got these bipolar flows, and then you've got a whole lot of other really cool types. All right, so this one is the Cat's Eye Nebula. You can see that there is bipolar symmetry, okay? There's stuff in the upper right that sort of matches stuff in the lower left, but there's a lot of cool stuff. The other thing about this image is you'll notice that there are all these concentric rings indicating multiple stages of blowout in this planetary nebula. The, I don't want to call them explosions, but the episodes of blowing material out and ionizing the material, and energy has happened many times, and you can see many concentric rings in the Cat's Eye Nebula. We also have this one. This one is called the Eskimo Nebula. I believe it's called the Eskimo Nebula because if you sort of squint your eyes at it and look at it, you might be able to see a furry parka around the edges and then a face in the center. Again, indicative of definite outflow from the center. Not quite bipolar in this case, but still some fascinating patterns we see in planetary nebulae. And I think, yeah, I have one more. This one looks like it's an explosion. It looks like a fireworks explosion. This is something you'd see in the sky on July 4th, a fireworks explosion, but it is actually a planetary nebula. It's a much more gentle blowout of material. I never actually investigated this one in any detail to find out why it looks so different from the others. My initial guess might be that it's at an earlier stage, and you're seeing some of the early things happening that are more advanced in the other ones. But again, I don't know for sure. But I've always liked to leave this one for last because it's just a fascinating look. But this is the way stars, middle-sized stars, die. All right, and so here we return to our 1999 image of the Ring Nebula. And for Hubble, for a press release this year, we were going to release a new version of the Ring Nebula. Unfortunately, this image is really good, and what more could we do? So the image that we released in 2013, this is the 1999 image. The image we released last week in 2013 looks like that. Okay, let me go back. Here is 1999, and here is 2013. And you might say, ooh, well, you rotated it and you changed the colors a bit. Yeah, we did. We rotated and we changed the color palette a bit. The main difference between the 1999 image, right, and the 2013 image is actually the resolution. We used a higher resolution detector for this image, and we were able to use dithering to get subpixel resolution out of this. And so if I take this region, if I take a sort of a region of the bottom and I blow it up to full scale, at least full scale for my resolution screen, I get this. And you can see the incredible detail that we can see in the Ring Nebula, that we couldn't see this much detail in the 1999 image. In particular, you're seeing all these dark knots along the interior edge of the Ring Nebula. Right? These are dark, dense regions that are actually resisting the radiation and wind from the outflows from the star. Right? So these are dense regions that have formed and are resisting the wind. They're sort of striation knots. And I wanted to show you this in detail because they're going to play a role in the view that we're going to discuss in just a minute. So I'm going to go back to the 2013 image. And so this is pretty much like what we released in 1999. But we had something even more, because the scientific result that we're announcing in this press release is an understanding of the three-dimensional structure of the Ring Nebula. The new results and the new filters that we used and the resolution that we had allowed Bob Odell at Vanderbilt University to determine, and his collaborators of course, to determine the three-dimensional structure. And in doing so, he also used some ground-based data from a telescope called the Large Binocular Telescope. So we had this Large Binocular Telescope, which isn't Hubble data, but it fits so well with the Hubble image that we decided we would release that, and it would look totally different, and it would be our main image for our press release. So here's the zoom in, and here, this is the image, the main image we used for the press release. Now you can see this has got the central region is still that Ring Nebula, but the outside of it is H2 emission from hydrogen captured by the Large Binocular Telescope. And it reveals the inner and outer halos around the Ring Nebula, which, in talking with Bob Odell, were actually heated up in an early phase of the formation of the planetary nebula. So as I said, when the star reaches the end of its red giant phase, and it tries to go from helium to burning to fusion of heavier elements, it can't, and it heats up and has it goes through various stages. And at that time, there's a rather large energy emission that heats up all the way out to this circular region that you see here. All right. So there's an initial stage that ionizes the gas all the way out to there, and then it goes through another phase in which it's actually physically pushing out the outer layers, which is what you see in the inner parts. So this remnant of the outside, this circular remnant from the outside, is a remnant of the earlier phases. And combine that with what Hubble showed you in its previous image, you get this magnificent structure, three-dimensional structure. It looks somewhat like a rose. Actually, we posted this on Facebook, and a couple people said, oh, you should now rename it the Rosette Nebula. Of course, we already have a nebula named the Rosette Nebula. But this is the Ring Nebula in all its glory, not just the visible light that Hubble sees, but also the longer wavelengths from the Large Binocular Telescope. So the challenge for me, which was a lot of fun, was to illustrate this three-dimensional structure that Bob Odell and his colleagues illuminated in their paper. So what my favorite things to do, one of my favorite things to do, is the scientific visualizations. If you remember last time I did Hubble Hangout, we talked about our three-dimensional visualization of the Horsehead Nebula. Well, after the Horsehead, our next project was the Ring Nebula. All right, and so to do this, I'm going to break down this image and show you all the various pieces and how we modeled it in 3 dimensions. So this is the helium-2 emission. Okay, helium-2 emission is the hottest emission. You'll notice that it's just in this very central region. This is the hottest gas right around the central star, or actually the central white dwarf. Okay, so helium comes from the highest energy gas in the nebula. This next image shows you the oxygen-3 emission. All right, this we've colored green. This comes from slightly lower temperature gas than the helium, and you can see that the central region is actually hollowed out, and that the green gas, the oxygen-3 emission, fills in that central ring of the nebula. The next image is going to show you the nitrogen-2 emission. Okay, this is from even lower temperature gas. All right, that's right on the edge of the ring, and it's actually a very thin ring. The way ionization structure works often is that the ionization comes to an end really quickly, all right, in a very thin region. And so what you're seeing here is the nitrogen gas on the edge of that ring. That there's a main ring in the Ring Nebula, and on the surface of that, or defining the surface of that main ring, is this nitrogen-2 emission. All right, finally, the fourth piece that we're going to add to this is that hydrogen-2 emission from the Large Binocular Telescope. So this is the hydrogen emission that you can see comes from outside that main ring. Actually, we sort of consider it as just outside that main ring. So this is, again, lower temperature, right, as well as the two inner and outer halos. The inner halo is this scallop region in here, and the outer halo is the roughly circular region in there, right? And so using those observations and various observations of what's in front of what, and the emission lines and absorption lines, he was able to determine a three-dimensional structure. So we took this and put it all together, and this is those 4 observations together give you that beautiful image. We then took it into our 3D modeling software. All right, so this is just the image in the 3D modeling software. It's a flat 2-dimensional thing. There's no 3D to it. But you can see we've marked the X and Y axes, as well as that diagonal line marks the rough long axis of the ring, of the main ring. Okay, so the main ring is not going to be circularly symmetric. Okay, and then we modeled that to try and come up with a 3-dimensional shape that matched what Bob and colleagues had written about in their paper. So here is a 3-dimensional sort of, we sometimes call it a donut, sometimes call it a bagel, but actually the real description for it that works is a tire. Okay, you notice how a tire has a curved section and lips on it. Okay, and you bring that around and make a full 3 dimensions. That's what you're looking at here. This is the sort of tire that forms the main structure of the ring. And then in the central region where you saw all that blue gas, the helium emission, there actually is a sort of a football shape, an oblong football or a blimp type shape. All right, and so the basic structure of the Ring Nebula in 3 dimensions is the combination of this main ring, the tire, and the lobes, or the football / blimp view. And if I turn that on its side, you can see this is the structure that the scientists had determined was the main structure of the nebula. So what did we do? We then took those structures, I did this modeling in 3D, and then filled them with particles. Okay, so here is the helium emission, the blue helium emission. Viewed edge on, it looks kind of circular, but it actually is an elongated football. You're just looking at it straight on ed. Then, of course, we have the green emission from the oxygen 3 gas, which is inside of the ring but yet outside of the lobe. And then we have the red nitrogen emission, which comes from the surface of the main ring. Now, with the helium and the oxygen emission, they are relatively space-filling, so we didn't have to do anything fancy with those. We could just sort of populate particles inside all of the volume, either inside the volume of the lobe or outside the volume of the lobe, but inside the volume of the ring. For the nitrogen ones, you'll notice that there's sort of patterns on the surface of this. And in computer graphics, we call this noise. Right? We want to provide an organic pattern because the nitrogen 2 doesn't cover the entire surface smoothly. My colleague Greg Bacon and I, Greg actually did most of the modeling work here. I provided the astronomical perspective and did some of the modeling. We worked to find a noise pattern that would roughly approximate what we see in the image. We're not going to get exactly what we see in the image because we're doing this in 3 dimensions with particles. We're not going to get exactly what you see in the image, but we're going to come up with a pattern that roughly approximates it. Okay? All right, and then when you put those 3 together and you render them, those what I was showing you was the modeling particles, and you render them together, you get the red of the ring, you get the green of the oxygen, you get the blue of the helium, and if you compare that to the original image, this was one of our test renders to say, hey, are we getting it reasonable? Okay, and as you can see, there's a lot more structure, a lot more detail in the Hubble image, but the Hubble image actually has what? About 7,000 by 7,000, about 50 million pixels in it. We're using only tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of particles, so we can't be expected to produce the same type of detail in it. Now, that's not to say we couldn't do it, just that the particular solution we used, the 3D modeling software that we use, couldn't handle 50 million particles. It would take much too long. I actually have some custom code that I've written that can handle it. We didn't have time to pull everything over into that for this process. Now, the thing that's definitely missing here is this is just those 3 pieces of it. What you don't see are these dark little knots all around the ring. And to do that, we couldn't just create those through the modeling software. I actually had to write some code. So what we did is we exported from our 3D modeling software a random set of positions on the ring. And from that, we then extrapolated out and created knots based upon those positions. All right, so let me go to the next slide. Here we go. All right, so these are the knots that we did in the modeling, okay? So choosing 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000, depending upon the various runs that we did, we took a position on the ring, and then from that, we chose a point inside it and created a line of particles. And then, of course, we added noise to that and random variation to that to give structure to it. All right, and you create all these various little knots that are sitting out on the inside of this ring. So you can think of the tire that we talked about previously having all these little things sticking inside it. Then those knots are actually blocking the light of the central star, so that there are shadows behind them that actually show up in hydrogen emission outside of the ring. So basically we've got these long shadows outside the ring that correspond to each of these. So again, in some Perl code that I wrote, we then took the same points on the ring and then projected them back outside to create these shadows. And that looks like this. This is one of the tests that I did to come up with the particles outside of the ring. Okay, and so you can see these are all, we refer to these as like porcupine quills. All right, so if you had the main ring structure and you just added porcupine quills, it's not exactly like that because there's a lot of random variation to it and everything. But these are the shadows of those those dark knot particles inside, then stretched to the outside. Finally, we've got to model those 2 halos. All right, and the inner halo had that really scalloped shape to it, and we chose to model that with this sort of sphere with other spheres pushed onto it. I actually, to be honest with you, I call this the bumble ball. because when you've got a newborn and you get these little balls that bounce all over the way and they bounce in funny shapes and directions, those are called bumble balls, right? That's what this one resembled to me. And it was the way that we could come up with a three-dimensional structure that matched the scalloped appearance of the image. And actually, we went back and forth on this for a while. When I looked at the image, I interpreted it as, a different way. I actually interpreted it as two linear structures moving off the edges of the ring, and that I could see how you could get a scallop structure based on that. I took that idea to Bob Odell, and he said, no, he thought it was more like this. I think it's unclear. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure that his idea I'm not sure that this idea is totally correct. Okay, the reason for it is that scientifically, how do you get so many centers of expansion, right? When you have a spherical structure in an astronomical object, your first thought is there's got to be something at the center of that to create that spherical structure. And I don't find the physical motivation of this fully convincing to me. But he's the PI on the project, and I have to illustrate what his ideas are, not usurp them with mine. So we did this structure, and you'll see here in the rendered version, oh, that's kind of faint. If you look really carefully, you can see that there are these scallop structures along the edges. Now, you might say, well, where's the stuff that was in the center? This is an effect in astronomy that we call edge brightening. Right? When you have a spherical shaped object and things are very loosely distributed across it, only as you look through the edges of the object do you get enough opacity, accumulation along the line of sight, along the edges, so the edges are brightened. Okay? Whereas the faces, you're looking through a very thin layer and you don't see much. Okay? So this is why you get that scallop structure based upon that bumble ball geometry. Finally, the outer halo was roughly spherical, and so we did a spherical shell with some noise pattern on it and a little bit of striations to get some of the radial streaking that came along in there. This doesn't look like it has a particular noise pattern on it, but it's all agglomerated, and the particles don't really show it there. And then when you put it up there, you can see, again, it's only edge brightened, and all you really see are the edges of that sphere. So, putting it all together, you get the full three-dimensional model for the Ring Nebula. And these static images don't really give you a great feel for it. So, as my PowerPoint tells me, I must now play the movie. So let's take the Ring Nebula movie, and I will play it for you and narrate it. Okay, so we're going to start with the constellation of Lyra in the sky. All right, and as we do, we try to orient you on the sky. We zoom in to the Ring Nebula in the constellation of Lyra. We're paging in different data sets going from the sky surveys to the view that we released with Hubble. Now that is the Hubble image. Now here is the three-dimensional model to show you. We've got the star at the center, and we have this ring. We add in the nitrogen and the hydrogen emission on the surface, the oxygen inside it, and finally we show you the lobe that contains the helium emission. Now in order to see those dark knots, we have to zoom in. So we brought the camera in close, and now we'll fade in those dark knots. They're kind of faint in there, kind of hard to see. But if you download it and then look at it in more detail, and then of course we add in the spiked shadows. Now we can pull back, and then we're going to fade in the inner and outer halos. That gives us our full three-dimensional model. And now for the finish of the movie, we're just going to rotate around it in 3D to show you the full three-dimensional structure of the Ring Nebula. We also added in some background stars so that you could grok the fact that you're doing a three-dimensional rotation around it. And there you go. That is the three-dimensional structure of the Ring Nebula. And if you would like to learn more on that, I now put on screen the website for the press release that we did. If you can't really read the full URL, you can read that we've got hubblesite.org is where you go. You click on News Center, and you look for our press release that is 2013/13. Okay? All right. And now let me go and stop my screen sharing. Come back to me here. All right, so what this shows you is that these two-dimensional pictures from Hubble only show you part of the full structure, and that it's not easy to be able to pick out the full three-dimensional shape of these objects. You know, it's scientific research. This is, you know, some of the latest scientific research on the Ring Nebula that has finally pulled out this accurate three-dimensional structure. And what is great is that Hollywood has developed all of these computer graphics tools that allow us to take those tools and use them for scientific visualization so that we can now show you, the public, the details of these scientific discoveries and show them off in 3 dimensions. All right, I don't have anyone here with me, so if you guys have been putting questions up on the Hangout page, let me just take a check to see if I can reload that to see what's going on there. I don't see any, my computer's not cooperating very well here. I don't see any, there's a Flash plugin that's not responding. Oh well. Okay. I don't see any questions on the page, or at least the refresh didn't work. So I'm going to have, why is it not responding? I can't even get back to the page that I need to. I can't even end the broadcast. I would like to end the broadcast, but the plugin is not responding. I'm trying to get to that and kill it. Ah, there we go. Now maybe I'll be able to do it. There we go. Okay, I hope that wasn't too annoying for you folks. Flash gave me some problems here. All right, I hope you enjoyed this Hubble Hangout with the Ring Nebula. If you have any questions, you can add them on to the webpage. You can find me at Dr. Frank Summers on Google+. I am Frank Summers. It's Dr. DrFrankSummers at gmail.com. Please feel free to ask me questions by email or on my Google+ page. Look forward to chatting with you. Thank you, and we'll see you again on the next. So I won't go full screen. All right. So what was I saying about the Ring Nebula? Ring Nebula, I guess if you haven't been seeing it, Jonathan's telling me what?
We're seeing that. We're not seeing the PowerPoint itself.
You're not seeing the PowerPoint screen. When I go full screen, it's not seeing it's not showing you full screen. It's only showing this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then I guess that's.
I think, yeah.
Going full screen doesn't work.
Share the whole desktop.
I did. Oh, if I share the whole desktop, then it'll do that?
Yeah.
All right. There we go. I'm out of my screen share, and I'm going to go back into my screen share where it says share the whole full screen. There we go. And then if I start screen share, we do this. I select that, and I go full screen. There we go. That should be what you're seeing now. So now that you've got the full screen there, instead of choosing the individual window. All right, so you were able to see the Ring Nebula when I was talking about it, but it was small, it wasn't full screen. Okay, so where was I? Ring Nebula, planetary nebula, phase, most of their lifetime, they are fusing hydrogen into helium in their cores. And after they run out of hydrogen in their cores, they start trying to fuse helium into carbon through the triple alpha process. That takes 3 helium nuclei, which are called alpha particles, pull them together to form carbon. And if you that happens for about 10% of the lifetime. Uh-oh. We're seeing just the admin of the PowerPoint. I'm getting a message. Is that better, Jonathan? It's like Jonathan Eisenhammer is in the background telling me things that are going wrong here. Can you? It's showing the wrong part of the PowerPoint. How about this, Jonathan? Now that if I just do screen share like this, will this work better? Let me get back to the Google Hangout and see what I'm sharing. All right, well, that looks like what I'm sharing is working. I guess if I go full screen, things go a little bit crazy. All right, okay, so our topic today is the Ring Nebula. And this image here is the Ring Nebula image that we released in 1999. This is the Hubble image of the Ring Nebula. Now, what is the Ring Nebula? Besides it's just this gorgeous ring, it's in the constellation of Lyra, and its category of a nebula is as a planetary nebula. Now, it has nothing to do with planets. Planetary nebula is a misnomer that when people first saw a nebula like this, they thought they might have something to do with planets because, if you see these fuzzy objects, they look sort of planetary-like, but this has nothing to do with planets. Matter of fact, what it is the death of a star, the death of a middle-aged star. I'm sorry, not middle-aged star. The death of a medium-sized star, a middle-sized star. Very, very big stars, they can they die by going bang. They can do supernova explosions. The less massive stars like the sun or a few times larger than the sun, die by by blowing off their outer layers. During their main sequence. Science Institute, and the broadcast video is now live. Welcome to our Hubble Hangout today. Many of you expected to see Tony Darnell here. Unfortunately, Tony had to leave on a family business and is unable to join us today. So what was going to be a conversation between Tony Darnell and myself, well, it's going to be a conversation between me and myself, so I guess I'm going to have multiple personalities today. Our topic today is the Ring Nebula, and we had a beautiful press release just last week about the three-dimensional structure of the Ring Nebula. And normally Tony and I would banter here all about the Ring Nebula, but I'm going to go directly to my screen sharing and pull up my PowerPoint. Starting my screen share, and let's see, what do I have to hit? There we go. Medium-sized star dies, goes through hydrogen fusion in its core during its main sequence, goes through helium fusion during its red giant stage. Okay, that's and then after it finishes helium fusion, it tries to go beyond that. And if it doesn't have enough mass, the gravity to compress the core of the star to heat it up to be able to go beyond that, it is unable to go beyond. It heats up but can't go further and actually ends up blowing off its outer layers. So what you're seeing with the Ring Nebula is actually the outer layers of the star being blown off like a smoke bubble into space. Let's see what Jonathan has to say here. All right, Jonathan says it's perfect now. I hope the rest of you think it's perfect too. Okay, so sorry, Tony's not here to run the Hangout, so this is only the second one I've run. All right, so what you're seeing is the outer layers of the star being blown off into space. And then at the very center, you see that white dot at the center? That is what will become a white dwarf. That's the core of the star. All right, so the planetary nebula is between the red giant phase where it blows off its outer layers and the